I thought my great-great-grandfather William was the most boring ancestor in my tree. William Thompson, farmer, born 1847, died 1923. That's it. 3 facts. 76 years of life reduced to basically nothing. Then I fed those 3 measly facts into AI and discovered he wasn't just a farmer. He was a survivor of the worst agricultural disasters in American history, a witness to the invention of the modern world, and a man who lived through more technological change than any generation before or since. And it took me 20 minutes to transform him from a genealogy footnote into a story that had my entire family forwarding the email around, asking questions, and suddenly caring about someone they'd never heard of before. If you've got ancestors who seem boring, ordinary, or downright dull, stick around, because today we're turning data into Dynasty. Welcome back to Ancestors and Algorithms, where family history meets artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Brian, and today we're diving into something that's going to blow your mind. Using AI to create compelling family stories that make your relatives actually want to read about their ancestors. We're talking about turning dry genealogy facts into stories that rival the best family novels. So let me tell you about William Thompson, because his story perfectly illustrates the challenge we all face as genealogists. I'd been doing genealogy for years, and William was just there, in my tree, taking up space. Born December 3rd, 1847 in Ohio, died March 15th, 1923 in Kansas. Occupation farmer. That's literally all I had. No military service, no dramatic immigration story, no famous connections, just a guy who farmed for his entire life. And you know what? I was embarrassed by him. I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out. When people asked about my family history, I'd talk about my Civil War soldier, my immigrant great-grandmother, my ancestor who homesteaded in Colorado. I never mentioned William. He was boring. But here's the thing. I realized I wasn't actually looking at William's life. I was looking at genealogy data points. Birth, death, occupation. That's not a life. That's an index card. So about 3 weeks ago, I decided to try something. I opened up ChatGPT and typed in exactly what I knew about William. Just those basic facts. And then I asked a simple question. Quote, what was life like for a farmer born in 1847 in Ohio? End quote. What came back absolutely floored me. William was born 2 years before the California Gold Rush. He was 4 years old when Uncle Tom's Cabin was published. He was 14 when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. He was 29 when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. He was 39 when the automobile was invented. He was 56 when the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. This boring farmer lived through the most transformative period in human history. He witnessed the birth of the modern world. But it gets better. I asked AI to tell me about farming in Ohio in the 1850s and 1860s. Turns out, William would have experienced the agricultural disasters of the 1860s. Massive crop failures, livestock diseases, economic collapse. Then the AI helped me understand what farming was like in Kansas in the 1880s and 1890s. Dust storms, grasshopper plagues, economic panics. This wasn't a boring farmer. This was a survivor. A man who persevered through challenges that would have broken most people today. And suddenly, William Thompson wasn't just data points anymore. He was a real person with a real story worth telling. All right, so let me break down exactly how we transform boring genealogy facts into compelling family stories using AI. I'm going to give you 5 techniques that work every single time, whether you have 3 facts like I did with William or 300 documents from decades of research. Technique number 1, the historical context amplifier. This is what opened my eyes about William. Most of us think about our ancestors in isolation. Birth date, death date, maybe a few life events. But AI excels at connecting dots across time periods. Here's the exact prompt I use. Quote, I have an ancestor who lived from birth year to death year in location. What major historical events, technological changes, and social movements would they have witnessed during their lifetime? Help me understand the world they lived in. End quote. Let me show you how this works with a different ancestor. My great-grandmother lived from 1898 to 1987. When I fed that into Claude, it told me she lived through both world wars, the Spanish flu pandemic, the Great Depression, the invention of radio, television, antibiotics, computers, space travel, and the civil rights movement. She went from horse-drawn carriages to watching men walk on the moon. Suddenly, she's not a name in my tree. She's a witness to the 20th century. Now, before I move on to our next technique, I want to take a few minutes to talk about something that some of you might have already discovered. Both Ancestry and MyHeritage have built-in AI storytelling features that do something similar to what we just talked about. Since we're learning to create our own compelling stories, I think it's important to understand what's already out there and where these tools excel and where they fall short. First, let's talk about Ancestry's Story Scout. This feature automatically creates stories about your ancestors using historical records and context. You enter a grandparent's information and it pulls together records and creates narrative stories about their lives. The pros of Story Scout, it can find records you didn't know existed. It connects your ancestors to major historical events, and it's completely automated. You just sit back and it does the work. It's especially good for people who are just getting started and want to see what's possible. But here are the cons I've discovered. Story Scout often gets facts wrong, and I've seen stories that had ancestors living in 2 different states at the same time. It gives the same generic story to every person who lived through the same historical event. So every woman who was alive in 1920 gets the identical women's suffrage story, whether she was 21 or 91. And there's no way to edit or dismiss inaccurate information. Now let's look at MyHeritage's AI biographer. This is actually more sophisticated than Story Scout. It creates Wikipedia-style biographies using your family tree data plus matching historical records. It includes source citations, flags inconsistencies when sources conflict, and creates downloadable PDF biographies. The pros of AI Biographer: much better accuracy than Story Scout, includes proper source citations so you can verify information, identifies consistency issues when data doesn't match up, and creates more formal, shareable biography documents. It also adds historical context and even includes information about surname origins. The cons? It only works in certain views of your family tree, which confuses a lot of users. Some people report technical glitches where their information gets corrupted. And, like Story Scout, you can't really edit the final product. You get what you get, so don't throw a fit. So here's the key difference between these automated tools and what we're learning to do today. Both Story Scout and AI Biographer create stories for you. We're learning to create stories with AI as our assistant. We're still doing the research, still checking the facts, still making sure the story actually fits our specific ancestor's real life. If you used either of these tools and found some interesting leads, that's fantastic. Use those as starting points for the techniques we're about to learn. Just remember to verify everything and make the story truly personal to your ancestors' actual experiences. The bottom line is this: automated tools can give you a head start, but they can't replace thoughtful, personalized storytelling that's grounded in solid research. Technique number 2, the GEDCOM story generator. Now, this one's really cool if you use Genealogy software. You can actually export your family tree data and feed it directly to AI to create flowing narratives. Here's how it works. If you use Roots Magic, Family Tree Maker, or Legacy, you can export what's called a GEDCOM file, GEDCOM. It's basically a text file with all your genealogy data. You can copy and paste sections of that file right into ChatGPT or Claude. The prompt I use is, quote, using the information in this GEDCOM data, write a biographical narrative about Ancestor's name. Focus on the timeline of their life and include historical context for the time periods they lived through, end quote. What's amazing is that AI takes all those disconnected dates and places and weaves them into a coherent story. It connects the dots between when they were born, when they married, when their children were born, where they moved, and what was happening in the world around them. Technique number 3, the emotional archaeology method. This is where we go beyond facts and start imagining what life actually felt like for our ancestors. Now, we're not making stuff up. We're using AI to help us understand the emotional context of historical events. Here's a prompt that works beautifully. Quote, my ancestor was a occupation, living in, location, during, time period. What would their daily life have been like? What challenges would they have faced? What would have worried them? What would have given them hope? End quote. When I tried this with William, the farmer, AI helped me understand that farming in the late 1800s wasn't just about planting and harvesting. It was about constant anxiety over weather, crop prices, equipment failures, and economic cycles completely beyond their control. Every growing season was a gamble with the family's survival. That's not boring. That's courage. Technique number 4, the voice recovery method. This technique involves writing stories from your ancestors' perspective in their own voice. It's incredibly powerful for creating emotional connection. The prompt I use is, quote, write a first-person narrative from the perspective of ancestor's name, describing specific life event or time period. Use the voice and language appropriate for someone of their education level and time period, but make it accessible to modern readers, end quote. I tried this with William, imagining him as an old man in 1920 looking back on his life. AI helped me write a story where he reflects on moving from Ohio to Kansas as a young man, the challenges of farming, raising children, and watching the world transform around him. What emerged was a voice that felt real, authentic, and deeply human. Technique number 5, the pattern detector. This last technique is about finding themes and patterns across an ancestor's entire life. AI is excellent at identifying connections that might not be obvious when you're looking at individual events. The prompt is, quote, looking at this person's life chronologically, what patterns do you see? What themes emerge? What character traits would be necessary to live this life? What story is their life telling? End quote. When I applied this to William's life, AI identified themes of resilience, adaptation, and quiet courage. It pointed out that he moved from Ohio to Kansas during a period when many families were migrating west, suggesting he was willing to take risks for better opportunities. It noted that he farmed through multiple economic downturns but somehow survived them all, indicating remarkable persistence. These patterns help us see our ancestors not just as collections of dates and places, but as real people with distinct personalities and character traits. Now, let me walk you through exactly how I use these techniques together. I start with historical context to understand the world my ancestor lived in. Then I use the emotional archaeology method to understand what their daily life felt like. Next, I employ the voice recovery technique to write scenes or reflections from their perspective. Finally, I use the pattern detector to identify the bigger themes and character traits that define their story. The result is a complete narrative that brings your ancestor to life as a real person with real struggles, real victories, and a real story worth telling. All right, let me show you this in action. I'm going to take another boring ancestor and transform them into a compelling story using these techniques live. Let me introduce you to Sarah Mitchell, born 1834, died 1899. Occupation, housewife, married to James Mitchell, had 6 children, lived in Pennsylvania her entire life. On the surface, not exactly thrilling, right? Let's see what AI can help us discover. First, the historical context amplifier. Sarah lived from 1834 to 1899. Let me ask AI, what major events would a woman living in Pennsylvania from 1834 to 1899 have experienced? Wow. Okay, so Sarah lived through the Second Great Awakening, the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Gilded Age, and the beginnings of the Progressive Era. She saw the invention of the telegraph, photography, the sewing machine, the typewriter, and electric lighting. She witnessed the abolition of slavery and the early women's rights movement. Now, let's try emotional archaeology. What would daily life have been like for a housewife with 6 children in Pennsylvania during the 1860s and 1870s? AI is telling me about the incredible physical demands of managing a household without modern conveniences. Water had to be carried, heated on wood stoves. Laundry was an all-day affair. Food preservation was constant work. And she was doing all of this while managing 6 children and likely helping with farm work or taking in additional work to support the family income. But here's what's really interesting, the Civil War. AI points out that Pennsylvania women played crucial roles in supporting the war effort. They organized relief societies, made supplies for soldiers, and managed households while men were away fighting. Now for the pattern detector, quote, what themes emerge from a woman who raised 6 children in Pennsylvania from 1834 to 1899, end quote. AI identifies themes of resourcefulness, community building, and quiet strength. It notes that raising 6 children to adulthood during this time period required incredible skill, since infant and child mortality rates were much higher. It suggests she would have been a master of household management, probably served as an informal doctor and pharmacist for her family, and likely was a pillar of her community. Finally, voice recovery. Let me have AI write a brief first-person reflection from Sarah's perspective. Quote, people today don't understand what it meant to keep people alive in those days. Every winter was a battle against cold, hunger, and sickness. Every summer meant preserving enough food to survive until the next harvest. When word came that there was fighting at Gettysburg, just miles from our home, I spent 3 days baking bread and tearing sheets into bandages. Not because anyone asked me to, but because that's what women did. We kept life going while the world fell apart around us. End quote. Do you see what just happened? In 5 minutes, Sarah Mitchell went from 3 boring facts to a compelling portrait of strength, resourcefulness, and quiet heroism. And here's the beautiful part. Every single detail AI provided can be verified through historical research. We're not making anything up. We're using AI to help us understand and communicate the reality of our ancestors' lives. So here's your homework for this week, and I want you to really commit to trying this. Pick your most boring ancestor. You know the one I'm talking about. The person in your tree with just basic birth and death information, maybe an occupation, who you've never bothered researching further because they seem uninteresting. I want you to use our AI storytelling techniques to create a 2 to 3 page story about their life. Start with the historical context amplifier to understand their world. Use emotional archaeology to imagine their daily experiences. Try the voice recovery method to write a scene or a reflection from their perspective. And finish with the pattern detector to identify the themes that define their life. Then, and this is the crucial part, share that story with one family member. It could be an email, a printed copy, a text message, whatever works for your family. But get it in front of someone else. And then pay attention to their response. Do they ask questions? Do they want to know more? Do they share it with someone else? That's how we measure success. Not whether it wins any writing awards, but whether it makes people care about their family history. I want to hear your results. Email me at ancestorsandai@gmail.com, or better yet, join our Facebook group and share your success story there. You can find the Facebook group at Ancestors and Algorithms AI for Genealogy. I'm planning to feature some of these transformed ancestor stories in future episodes, with your permission, of course. And speaking of the Facebook group, we've had some amazing discussions this week about Episode 5's photo enhancement techniques. Several of you have shared incredible before and after results, and others have asked some really thoughtful questions about the ethics of AI photo modification. These conversations are exactly why this community is so valuable. Also, I want to address a question that came up in the group about AI accuracy. Someone asked whether we should be concerned about AI making things up about our ancestors. This is a great question, and it touches on something fundamental about how we use these tools responsibly. Remember, we're not asking AI to research our ancestors for us. We're asking it to help us understand and communicate what we already know. Every historical detail AI provides should be something you can verify through traditional research methods. AI is helping us connect dots and provide context, not create facts. Let me wrap up with the 3 key takeaways from today's episode. First, no ancestor is boring. Every person who lived had a story worth telling. Sometimes we just need help seeing it and telling it effectively. Second, AI excels at providing context and making connections across time periods. Use it to understand the world your ancestors lived in, not to create facts about their specific lives. And third, the goal isn't to write perfect family histories. The goal is to create stories that make people care. If your family members start asking questions about their ancestors, you've succeeded. As we always say here at Ancestors and Algorithms, AI is your research assistant, not your researcher. These storytelling tools help us communicate the incredible lives our ancestors actually lived. We're just learning to tell those stories in ways that capture the attention and imagination of modern audiences. Next week, we're diving into something that might make you a little uncomfortable, but it's absolutely crucial for responsible AI use in genealogy. We're talking about what happens when AI gets your family history completely wrong, how to spot these mistakes before they spread, and why these failures might actually be your biggest breakthroughs in disguise. It's going to be eye-opening, and I think it might change how you think about AI reliability in genealogy research. Until then, I'm your host, Brian. Go transform some boring ancestors into family legends. I can't wait to hear what you discover.